Hello everybody, my name is Zeke. Welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about some anticipated books that I have that are coming out relatively soon, or not so soon, as you'll see. This list basically spans from now until June of next year, so it's kind of a wide range, and I definitely missed some books that I'll probably think about right after I finish filming this. But for now, I have 7 books that I picked out that I know are coming out within that time period and that I'm going to talk about. Some I'm more familiar with than others, but I want to read all of them at some point. Now, one of my great shames is that I made a very similar video last year, kind of in the fall, and I think I read a grand total of 0 of the books I talked about there. But I will be honest, when I was making that video, I picked out books that I really wasn't that familiar with, and I didn't have a ton of motivation to read. All of them kind of sounded interesting to me at the time, but I never was super invested in any of them, and so I've tried to approach things very differently this time. All the books I picked out, I think without fail, are from either an author I've read from before and enjoyed, or an author that I've heard a lot of good about and that I think I definitely will enjoy. So I'll have a little more motivation to actually pick up these books, even if it's not exactly when they come out, but I will definitely get to at least some of these at some point in time. So the first book might be cheating a little bit because by the time this video comes out, I think it'll already be out because it comes out on August 13th, but that's Minas Matchbox. This is not actually a new book. I think it came out in 2006, but it's just now being translated into English, or at least a new version of it is. I'm not completely sure, but I want to read this because it's the same author of a book called The Memory Police, which I read, I want to say 2 years ago now, and I actually didn't absolutely love it. I think I ended up giving it 3.5 stars, but I really liked the ideas in that book. I was also a big fan of the writing and kind of the atmosphere that the author was able to build in that book. It was kind of unsettling, creepy. You didn't really know what was going on, and I liked that aspect. I wasn't a huge fan of where the actual plot went though, so I'm hoping with this I'll get more of what I liked and different things from what I didn't like, maybe a more engaging, satisfying plot. So I'm just going to read the description looking down. In the spring of 1972, 12-year-old Tomoko leaves her mother behind in Tokyo and boards a train alone for Ashiya, a coastal town in Japan, to stay with her aunt's family. Tomoko's aunt is an enigma and an outlier in her working-class family, and her magnificent home and handsome foreign husband, the president of a soft drink company, are symbols of that status. The 17 rooms are filled with German-made furnishings, there are sprawling gardens, and even an old zoo where the family's pygmy hippopotamus resides. The family is just as beguiling as their mansion. Tomoko's dignified and devoted aunt, her German grandmother, and her dashing, charming uncle, who confidently sits as the family's patriarch. At the center of the family is Tomoko's cousin Mina, a precocious, asthmatic girl of 13 who draws Tomoko into an intoxicating world full of secret crushes and elaborate storytelling. So from the rest of the description, it kind of seems like it's going to be talking throughout this book a lot about this one moment in time, this moment of youth and family, as kind of a snapshot of Tomoko's life, who's then in the future reflecting on this one moment. And so I think I kind of am interested in that framing device, and I'm also interested in the complicated discussions of family that I'm sure this book will bring up from the description, as there seems to be a lot going on beneath the surface, and I'm excited to find out what all of that is about. The next book comes out in September of this year, and that's Entitlement by Rumin Alam. This is the same author of a dystopian book called Leave the World Behind that was recently made into a movie that I think I've heard was absolutely awful, and I think the book is very divisive too, but that's kind of a very unsettling, subtle dystopian book. There's kind of an apocalypse happening, and it's told in a very quiet way. It's not a very satisfying story. There's no action. It's really about these two families that are forced to live with each other in a strange situation, and the tension that brews there. And I think there are a lot of interesting conversations in that book, so I'm excited for this book. This book, the description reads, Brooke wants, she isn't in need, but there are things she wants. A sense of purpose, for instance. She wants to make a difference in the world, to impress her mother along the way, to spend time with friends and secure her independence. Her job assisting an octogenarian billionaire in his quest to give away a vast fortune could help her achieve many of these goals. It may inspire new desires as proximity to wealth turns out to be nothing less than transformative. What is money, really, but a kind of belief? Taut, unsettling, and alive to the seductive distortions of money, Entitlement is a riveting tale for our new Gilded Age, a story that confidently considers questions about need and worth, race and privilege, philanthropy and generosity, passion and obsession. It is a provocative, propulsive novel about the American imagination. From this, I'm getting kind of similar ideas that I think will definitely be discussed as in Leave the World Behind, but in a very different kind of story. That book also talks about race. It also talks about class in more subtle ways. And I'm sure that I will get more out of this book. Also, I think kind of this idea of the perspective of this main character we're going to be following and her position is fascinating, and I'm curious about how that will play out over the course of the book. This also reminds me a lot of another book, very popular, Trust by Hernan Diaz, with kind of how I'm sure wealth will be talked about. And this description kind of reminds me of the ideas that book tackles about like hidden subtleties behind wealth, and also different perspectives on a story of wealth. This isn't exactly the same as that, but that was just something that immediately kind of a connection I formed, and I'm curious to see if there'll be any similarities there. I wasn't a huge fan of Trust, but I did enjoy it, and this seems really interesting, and I'm excited to read it. Next is a very big one, and that's Intermezzo by Sally Rooney, which comes out in September of this year as well. I think this is the only book from this list from an author I haven't read from, which is kind of shocking at this point. I think I just haven't picked up any Sally Rooney books, particularly like Normal People, which I definitely should have read at this point because I just know it's so popular, and I keep putting it off because I'm like, okay, I can just read it whenever. Like I can always find a copy somewhere, but I should actually pick it up and read it, and I'm curious what I'll think. But for now, this book, Intermezzo, kind of reminded me that I really need to pick up a Sally Rooney book, and maybe this will be the one I go to, although I'll probably end up reading something else first because I can imagine this will be very hard for me to get my hands on when it first comes out, when everyone is trying to get it from the library. But the description is that Peter is a Dublin lawyer in his 30s, successful, competent, and apparently unassailable. But in the wake of their father's death, he is medicating himself to sleep and struggling to manage his relationships with two very different women, his enduring first love, Sylvia, and Naomi, a college student for whom life is one long joke. Ivan is a 22-year-old competitive chess player. He has always seen himself as socially awkward, a loner, the antithesis of his glib elder brother. Now, in the early weeks of his bereavement, Ivan meets Margaret, an older woman emerging from her own turbulent past, and their lives become rapidly and intensely intertwined. For two grieving brothers and the people they love, this is a new interlude, a period of desire, despair, and possibility, a chance to find out how much one life might hold inside itself without breaking. So from this description seems very Sally Rooney from everything I know about her books. She talks a lot about just character relationships and nuanced, complicated relationships, and that seems to be like the driving force behind this new book. There'll be the relationships between these two brothers, the relationships that they're building now, their relationship with their father who has just died, and I'm just hoping that the amazing character work and relationship work I know that Sally Rooney is known for, I hope that it lives up to the hype for me, and hopefully I will read this at some point and enjoy it. Next, I have The Emporium by Olga, I'm about to butcher this last name, Tokarczuk, and that comes out in September of 2024. This is the same author of a book called Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead. I had to take a second to make sure I got that right. That book is a very unsettling, weirdly written and subtle murder mystery that centers on an elder woman kind of not living in isolation but living in an isolated town, and all her neighbors and things are going wrong, and we're kind of slowly building towards a very, very interesting ending that I obviously won't spoil, but I really enjoyed that book. I loved how subtle it was. I loved the writing, and I love the character work, and so I kind of really want to read this new book that I had no idea was coming out. This is another one that I think has been out for a few years, but it's just now getting translated, and so I'm excited for that. I'm going to read this description, and I'm going to skip over the names because that's just going to absolutely be miserable for you to listen to. But in September 1913, a student suffering from tuberculosis arrives at a guest house for gentlemen, a health resort in what is now Western Poland. Every day, its residents gather in the dining room to imbibe the hallucinogenic local liquor, to obsess over money and status, and to discuss the great issues. Will there be war, monarchy, or democracy? Do devils exist? Are women inherently inferior? Meanwhile, disturbing things are beginning to happen in the guest house and its surroundings. As stories of shocking events in the surrounding highlands reach the men, a sense of dread builds. Someone or something seems to be watching them and attempting to infiltrate their world. Little do they know, as the main character attempts to unravel both the truths within himself and the mystery of the sinister forces beyond, that they have already chosen their next target. So my understanding of this book is it's kind of a satirical take on another book published about a century ago called The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann. I think that it is a horror book, but it's kind of a satire in a way. It's going to be satirizing kind of the political philosophy that these people are talking about on this like health retreat while they're hallucinating because of the drugs they're taking. I'm expecting a lot of interesting commentary there. This book seems very different from Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead, but it also just seems just as interesting, and I'm sure there'll be a lot to unpack here, and I'm excited for it because it also just seems really different and unique, and that is another reason to be very excited. The next one really snuck up on me, and that's Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson, which is actually coming out December of this year, I think, which is crazy to actually think about for me. This is the 5th book in the Stormlight Archives series. Now, I know I usually don't talk about fantasy that much, but until like 2-3 years ago, that's basically all I read, and Brandon Sanderson was one of my favorite authors. He's still really high up because I think he's just a master at modern fantasy, and it's really incredible to read. Especially the Stormlight Archive is like his big magnum opus series that he's working on. It's going to be 10 books, but he's trying to split it into 2 parts, the first 5 books and the second 5 books, and this is the 5th book, so the end of the first part. The last book came out in 2020. I read it as soon as it came out, and I was like, oh, it's going to be so long for the next book, and now we've made it, which is absolutely crazy to think about, and I'm super excited. I'm not even going to attempt a plot description. I would just look it up because there's so much going on, and at this point, it's been so long since I've read that first book. It was probably like 2019 when I read that first book that I couldn't even like begin to give a summary without spoiling anything. Like, I know I would spoil things. Another thing I'm worried about is, since it's been so long, I need to be refreshed. Like, I just don't remember most of what's going on at this point because it's been 4 years since I read the last book, and so I'll have to figure out what I'm going to do there, but I'm really excited for this to come out, and I'm going to have to wait for a time when I can really sit down and just read it. I'm not going to read it as soon as it comes out because I want to make sure I have a chunk of time, but once I have that chunk of time, I'm really, really excited to dig in and finish this first half of this absolutely incredible, mind-bending, life-altering series. Now getting into next year, in January there's a book called We Do Not Part by Han Kang coming out. I want to read this because this is the same author of The Vegetarian, which is very unsettling. You might be sensing a theme here with the books I like and the books I want to pick up. All these authors have written like unsettling books, is a very clear trend line I'm seeing, but The Vegetarian is a very unsettling book about a woman who one day wakes up and decides to be a vegetarian, but there's kind of other things going on, and it kind of spirals into this really wild ride. And because that reading experience was so unique and so memorable, that's really made me want to pick up this new book that I did not know was coming out once again. The description reads, one morning in December, Kyung-ha receives a message from her friend In Seon saying she has been hospitalized in Seoul and asking that Kyung-ha join her urgently. The two women have last seen each other over a year before on Jeju Island, where In Seon lives, and where 2 days before this reunion, she has injured herself chopping wood. Airlifted to Seoul for an operation, In Seon has had to leave behind her pet bird. Bedridden, she begs Kyung-ha to take her first plane to Jeju to save the animal. A snowstorm hits the island when Kyung-ha arrives. She must reach In Seon's house at all costs, but the icy wind and snow squalls slow her down as night begins to fall. She wonders if she will arrive in time to save the bird, or even survive the terrible cold that envelops her with every step. Lost in its world of snow, she doesn't yet suspect the plunge into the darkness which awaits her at her friend's house. There, the long-buried story of In Seon's family surges into light in dreams and memories passed from mother to daughter, and in the archive painstakingly assembled at the house, documenting a terrible massacre on the island. We Do Not Part is a hymn to friendship, a eulogy to the imagination, and above all, a powerful indictment against forgetting. Like a long winter's dream, these beautiful pages form much more than a novel. They illuminate a traumatic memory buried for decades that still resonates today. This sounds really odd from the very first premise of her going to her friend's house to save her bird and almost dying in a snowstorm. And that is very intriguing to me because it sounds very odd and very unique. And just like in The Vegetarian, I'm sure this very odd premise will be used to uncover a lot of subtle thematic depth about, in this case, friendship and whatever happened in this village, in this family. So I'm really excited to see how this goes, and I'm sure it'll at least be interesting, if nothing else. Okay, the next one and the last one I'm going to talk about is a book that comes out in May 2025, so hopefully I don't forget about it before then, and that's The Devils by Joe Abercrombie. This is another of my favorite fantasy authors. He wrote this trilogy called the First Law trilogy, and then he has like 6 other books related to that first trilogy that I've read, I think all of them, that are just absolutely incredible. Probably one of, if not my favorite fantasy series of all time, although I really can't say that at this point, because even saying that, I'm thinking of like 3 other series that I would have to have fight for that top slot. But definitely one of my favorite fantasy series I've ever read. Really has stuck with me for a long time, and one of my first like big fantasy series I ever tackled, so definitely hold a special place in my heart. Now, while what I really want is the next book in this First Law world, I'm still excited for this new book, which has absolutely nothing to do with that, to my knowledge. In this book, Brother Diaz has been summoned to the sacred city, where he is certain a commendation and grand holy assignment awaits him, but his new flock is made up of unrepentant murderers, practitioners of ghastly magic, and outright monsters, and the mission he is tasked with will require bloody measures from them all in order to achieve its righteous ends. Elves lurk at our borders and hunger for our flesh, while greedy princes care for nothing but their own ambitions and comfort. With a hellish journey before him, it's a good thing Brother Diaz has the devils on his side. This screams Joe Abercrombie for me. The First Law trilogy and wider world is known for its morally ambiguous characters, its extreme violence, its kind of dark fantasy elements, and this seems to have a lot of that too, in just a different package. And I'm kind of just excited to see how it goes. It seems very interesting from the premise, and I hope I get a lot of what I love about Joe Abercrombie so much, which is these kind of morally gray stories with very complicated characters. So those are the 7 books that I can think of now, and that I found now that I'm really excited to read in the coming months. I hope I'm able to read some of them. I hope they go well, and let me know if any of these you didn't know about them, you're now excited to read them, or if there's any other books that are coming out soon that I should definitely know about, that I should definitely try to pick up. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe if you want, and I will see you in the next one.